Storytime.
Show yourselves, cowards.
There's a greeting that's hard to refuse.
Yeah, it's not landed at job interviews yet, but I live in hope.
Modified slightly. Employ me, cowards.
Yeah.
It's Dexter under a van.
It's actually, so my power move for job interviews is like to go in for the handshake, and when they say like, how are you? I say goal oriented. That's how I am. And then I like make sustained eye contact with them while going through my like kata. And then like, yeah, I often like I'll bring like a small like training dummy to like demonstrate. Well, like obviously not like a full thing, because that would be impractical for bringing to interviews, but like an inflatable not
like a doll version of the crash test dummy.
That could be, I'm saying there's dual use. You inflate it, then you can practice sparring moves on it while like staring down your prospective employers. Yeah.
Sounds like.
And if it's also bald and has a beard and you happen to put a tattoo on its head, it also works as a body double for your filming work.
Well, and for job interviews, yeah, because if I'm like, I'm zoning out of this one, then I can just leave it there and sneak out of the room.
Perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm such a weirdo. I'm the person who loves job interviews. I know that most people are not on that page. I genuinely like an environment where you are supposed to brag and everyone expects people to fudge a little.
I used to enjoy job interviews, then I didn't do one for 10 years, and Deer in the Headlight did one. And I've been getting back up to speed since, to the point where I enjoy them, but I'm definitely getting better again about enjoying them.
Nice.
When I first graduated, I did a 4-day interview gauntlet with Microsoft and another 4-day interview gauntlet with Google voluntarily for jobs I didn't really want. Mostly because they flew me out to the States for them, but partly because I genuinely enjoy them.
Yeah.
In all fairness, a free overseas trip, that's a good reason for me.
Yeah. Hello.
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 Hi.
Fancy seeing you here. You come here often.
Oh,
hi.
Hey. What's a cutie like all of you doing in a Zoom call like this?
Some cutie promised us stories, actually. So I guess that's what we're all doing here. But mostly it's to see your face.
Oh, you.
You gave me an opportunity. You know how this works.
That's not all I'll give you. Oh, yeah.
And that's Frankie's job interview technique.
I'm mostly unemployed.
We're just talking about like job interview stuff. Like Lyric, like fucking rules at job interviews. They fucking coast.
I can completely imagine that, but give me more information as to why.
Oh, I just like an excuse where I'm supposed to brag about myself and I'm allowed to fudge a little because one, I don't, do that often. It's like hard to feel like there's a space to brag about yourself. And two, that means I can exaggeratedly brag about myself, which means it's probably going to be closer to what it actually is than my like, I guess I'm okay with this thing, normal state.
Yeah. Well, Lyric, thank you for coming in today. This is the part of the Storytime interview process where I would invite you to tell us a little bit about yourself. I'd be interested to hear what
do you bring to the Storytime community?
Yes, what would you say is one of your strongest qualities?
I would have to say shameless flirting. I'm really good at finding something attractive about just about everyone. And if there's even like a tiny bit of an opportunity, and might I just say, you both look particularly handsome stroking each other's chins like that.
Thank you. Good candidate.
Good candidate.
Good candidate.
Good candidate.
You say hello to other people.
Oh,
Hi, everyone.
I
Sorry.
don't put it like that.
Yeah, I gotta say, I feel like the selection process might be a little bit rigged here, since you haven't even addressed any of the other candidates.
Well, we want to give you all the time and attention that you deserve, which is a long time and dedicated attention. So yeah, we like to give you one time.
I'm pretty sure Rory picked up his interview technique from Viz Top Tips, so I'm intrigued how that mixes.
What's your interview technique, sweetie?
Wait, what's mine?
Yes.
Or Duncan's? Oh, okay. All right, let's role play it right now. Okay, we start going like handshake.
Yeah.
All right, and ask me how I am.
How are you?
How are you?
Goal oriented. That's how. That's how I am.
Nice.
Yeah.
The goal is this job.
Yeah. And then I do a bunch of karate while maintaining eye contact, to show like I'm vigorous and you know stuff. But yeah, actually, in all seriousness, one time I had to do a job interview at a place that I won't go into any more detail about because we are recording, but I needed to not get hired long term there, because of things I was doing in Minecraft. Anyway, but I needed to not blow my cover, and so. But they wanted to like interview me for a permanent post, and I needed to not get the post. And so they asked me what my like long-term plan was of like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? That question. And I straight up said, not here. I told them about how I wanted to become like a wood carver specializing in like turning like custom sex toys.
Amazing.
Nice. Did she appreciate
It didn't work.
that?
They still offered me the gig.
Nice.
I don't know what the hell. Like,
Did they buy any
Did they
sex
ask
toys?
for your Sorry, what was that, Zach?
Did they buy any sex toys?
no, not as yet.
Ah.
I was going to ask if they retained your contact information in case they wanted sex toys in the future. So same page.
I hope not, for reasons I won't go into in Minecraft. Thank you.
Did they ask about splinters?
Good question.
They did. Yeah. It's all about that ceiling.
Have you ever seen the movie Office Space? It sounds like a circumstance from that.
It definitely felt like that at the time.
Zach solo. That was exciting. That was exciting. Can we have a big hand for guest soloist Zachary Goldie on the Stupid About Buzz tonight?
Thank you.
Right. Mute. Okay, now everyone. I know we have just done the theme tune, so I won't keep us long. Firstly, hello everybody. I love you, and it's nice to see you. 2 serious times. This is going to be intense. Like, for realsies, this is going to be a little bit of an intense one with some mention of some pretty nasty stuff. You know, it's Discworld, it's, you know, it's not Train Spotting, but this is not necessarily going to be a super fluffy episode. So ye be warned. that here be dragons. Now, though, we'll hydrate through it and we'll have a good time. Now. My beloveds, successful candidates for the job of my darling, are you sitting comfortably? And I'll begin. In the light of all his burning bridges, Vimes slipped his hand back into his hip pocket. Thank you, Mrs. Goodbody, and your range of little equalizers. He turned to the watchmen, who were a tableau of silent horror. Let the record show Sergeant-at-Arms John Keel did that, he said. Vimes, what did I tell you about waving weapons around when you're not going to use them? You laid him out, Sarge, Sam squeaked, still staring at the sleeping captain. Vimes shook some life back into his hand. Let the record show that I took command after the captain's sudden attack of insanity, he said. Waddy Wiglet, drag him back to the lockhouse and lock him up, will you? What are we going to do, Sarge? Wailed Colon. Keep the peace. That was the thing. People often fail to understand what that meant. You'd go to some life-threatening disturbance, like a couple of neighbours scrapping in the street over who owned the hedge between their properties, and they'd both be bursting with aggrieved self-righteousness, both yelling. Their wives would either be having a private scrap on the side or would have adjourned to the kitchen for a shared pot of tea and a chat, and they all expected you to sort it out. And they could never understand that it wasn't your job. Sorting it out was a job for a good surveyor and a couple of lawyers, maybe. Your job was to quell the impulse to bang their stupid fat heads together, to ignore the affronted speeches of dodgy self-justification, to get them to stop shouting and to get them off the street. Once that had been achieved, your job was over. You weren't some walking god dispensing finely tuned natural justice. Your job was simply to bring back peace. Of course, if your few strict words didn't work and Mr. Smith subsequently clambered over the disputed hedge and stabbed Mr. Jones to death with a pair of gardening shears, then you had a different job, sorting out the notorious hedge argument murder. But at least it was one you were trained to do. People expected all kinds of things from coppers, but there was one thing that sooner or later they all wanted. Make this not be happening. Make this not be happening. What? He said, suddenly noticing a voice that had, in fact, been on the edge of awareness for some time. I said, was he insane, Sarge? But when you're falling off the cliff, it's too late to wonder if there might have been a better way up the mountain. He asked you to shoot at people who weren't shooting back, growled Vimes, striding forward. That makes him insane, wouldn't you say? They are throwing stones, Sarge, said Colon. So, stay out of range. They'll get tired before we do. In fact, the barrage of missiles from the barricade had ceased. Even in a time of crisis, the people of Ankh-Morpork would stop for a decent piece of street theatre. Vimes walked back towards them, stopping on the way to retrieve Rust's bent megaphone. As he approached, he cast his eye over faces just visible through the chair legs and junk. There would be unmentionables somewhere, he knew, helping matters along. With luck, they wouldn't have bothered with Whalebone Lane. There was muttering from the defenders. Most of them had a look Vimes recognised because it was the one he was trying to keep off his own face. It was the look of people whose world had suddenly been swept from under them, and now they were trying to tap dance on quicksand. He tossed away the stupid, pompous megaphone. He cupped his hands. "Some of you know me," he shouted. "I'm Sergeant Keel, currently in command of the Treacle Mine Road Watch House, and I order you to dismantle this barricade." There was a chorus of jeers and one or two badly thrown missiles. Vimes waited, stock still, until they died away. Then he raised his hands again. "I repeat, I order you to dismantle this barricade." He took a breath and went on. "And rebuild it on the other side on the corner with Cable Street. And put up another one at the top of Shear Street, properly built. Good grief, you don't just pile stuff up, for God's sake. A barricade is something you construct. Who's in charge here?" There were sounds of consternation behind the overturned furniture, but a voice called out, "You?" There was nervous laughter. "Very funny. Now laugh this one off. No one's interested in us yet. This is a quiet part of town. But when things go really bad, you're going to have cavalry on your backs, with sabres. How long would you last? But if you shut off this end of Treacle Mine Road and the end of Sheer, then they're left with alleyways, and they don't like that. It's up to you, of course. We'd like to protect you, but me and my men will be behind the barricades over here." He turned on his heel and marched back to the waiting watchmen. "Right, lads," he said. "You heard. Pounce and Gaskin, you take the hurry-up wagon up to the bridge and turn it over. Waddy and Nancy Ball, and you too, Freds, go and nick some carts. You grew up round here, so don't tell me you've never done that before. I want a couple blocking the streets down here, and the rest, I want you to run them into the alley mouths until they wedge. You men know the area. Block up all the little back ways." Colon rubbed his nose. "We could do that on the riverside, Sarge, but it's all alleys on the Shape side. Can't block them all." "I wouldn't worry about those," said Vimes. "Cavalry can't come through there. You know what they call a horse in the shades?" Colon grinned. "Yeah, Sarge. Lunch." "Right. The rest of you get all the benches and tables out of the watch house." It dawned on him that none of the men had moved. There was a certain problem in the air. "Well?" Billy Wiglet removed his helmet and wiped his forehead. How far is this going to go, Sarge?" "All the way, Billy." "But we took the oath, Sarge, and now we're disobeying orders and helping rebels. Doesn't seem right, Sarge," said Wiglet wretchedly. "You took an oath to uphold the law and defend the citizens without fear or favour," said Vimes, "and to protect the innocent. That's all they put in. Maybe they thought those were the important things. Nothing in there about orders, even from me. You're an officer of the law, not a soldier of the government." One or two of the men looked longingly at the other end of the street, empty and inviting. "But I won't stop anyone who wants to walk," said Vimes. They stopped looking. "Hello, Mr. Keel," said a sticky voice behind him. "Yes, Nobby," he said without turning round. "Here, how did you detect it was me, Sergeant?" It's an amazing talent, kid, said Vimes, turning against all wisdom to look at the urchin. What's been happening? Big riot in Sator Square, Sarge. And they say people have broke into the Dolly sisters' watch house and thrown the lieutenant out the window. And there's looting all over the place, they say, and the day watcher out chasing people, only most of them are hiding now, because... Yeah, I get the picture, sighed Vimes. Carcer had been right. Coppers were always outnumbered, so being a copper only worked when people let it work. If they refocused and realised you were just another standard idiot with a pennyworth of metal for a badge, you could end up a smear on the pavement. He could hear shouting now, a long way off. He looked around at the hesitant watchman. On the other hand, gentlemen, he said, if you are going to leave, where are you going to go to? The same thought had clearly occurred to Colon and the others. We'll get the carts, he said, hurrying off. And I wants a penny, said Nobby, holding out a grubby hand. To the boy's amazement, Vimes gave him $1, saying, and just keep telling me everything, will you? Tables and benches were already being dragged out of the watch house, and after only a couple of minutes, Waddy arrived with a cartload of empty barrels. Barricades were easy in these streets. It was keeping them clear that had always been the problem. The watchmen set to work. This was something they understood. They'd done it when they were kids. And perhaps they thought, hey, this time we're wearing uniforms. We can't be in the wrong. While Vimes was struggling to wedge a bench into the growing wall, he was aware of people behind him. He worked steadily, however, until someone gave a delicate cough. Then he turned. Yes, can I help you? There was a small group of people, and it was clear to Vimes that it was a group pushed together out of shared terror because, by the look of them, they'd have nothing to do with one another if they could possibly avoid it. The spokesman, or at least the one in front, looked almost exactly like the kind of person Vimes had pictured when thinking about the Hedge argument murder. Officer? Yes, sir. What are you doing exactly? Keeping the peace, sir. This peace, to be exact. You said that there's rioting and soldiers on the way. Very likely, sir. You don't have to ask him, Rutherford. It's his duty to protect us, snapped the woman who was standing beside the man with an air of proprietorship. Vimes changed his mind about the man. Yes, he had that furtive look of a timid domestic poisoner about him, the kind of man who'd be appalled at the idea of divorce but would plot woman slaughter every day. And you could see why. He gave the lady a nice warm smile. She was holding a blue vase. Can I help you, ma'am? He said. What are you intending to do about us being murdered in our beds? She demanded. Well, it's not 4 o'clock yet, ma'am, but if you let me know when you want to retire. Vimes was impressed at the way the woman drew herself up. Even Sybil, in full Duchess mode, with the blood of 20 generations of arrogant ancestors behind her, could not have matched her. Rutherford, are you going to do something about this man? She said. Rutherford looked up at Vimes. Vimes was aware that he was villainously unshaven, dishevelled, dirty, and probably starting to smell. He decided not to load more troubles on the man's back. Would you and your lady care to assist with our barricade? He said. Oh, yes, thank you very, Rutherford began, but was outgunned again. Some of that furniture looks very dirty, said Mrs. Rutherford. And aren't those beer barrels? Yes, ma'am, but they're empty ones, said Vimes. Are you sure? I refuse to cower behind alcohol. I have never approved of alcohol, and neither has Rutherford. I can assure you, ma'am, that any beer barrel in the presence of my men for any length of time will be empty, said Vimes. You may rest assured on that score. And are your men sober and clean living? The woman demanded. Whenever no alternative presents itself, ma'am, said Vimes. This seemed acceptable. Mrs. Rutherford was like rust in that respect. She listened to the tone of voice, not the words. I think perhaps it would be a good idea, dear, if we made haste to, Rutherford began. Not without father, said his wife. No problem, ma'am, said Vimes. Where is he? On our barricade, of course, which was, let me tell you, a rather better barricade altogether. Jolly good, ma'am, said Vimes. If he'd like to come over here, we'll... you don't quite understand, sir, murmured Rutherford. He is, on the barricade. Vimes looked at the other barricade, and then looked harder. It was just possible to see, near the top of the piled-up furniture, an overstuffed armchair. Further examination suggested that it was occupied by a sleeping figure in carpet slippers. He's very attached to his armchair, sighed Rutherford. It's going to be an heirloom, said his wife. Be so kind as to send your young men to collect our furniture, will you? And be careful with it. Put it at the back somewhere where it won't get shot at. Vimes nodded at Sam and a couple of the other men as Mrs. Rutherford picked her way over the debris and headed for the watch-house. Is there going to be any fighting? Said Mr. Rutherford anxiously. Possibly, sir. I'm not very good at that sort of thing, I'm afraid. Don't worry about that, sir. Vimes propelled the man over the barricade and turned to the rest of the little group. He'd been aware of eyes boring into him, and now he traced the rays back to source. A young man with black trousers, a frilly shirt, and long curly hair. This is a ruse, isn't it? Said the man. You'll get us in your power and we'll never be seen again, eh? Stay out then, Reg, said Vimes. He cupped his hands and turned back to the Whalebone Lane barricade. Anyone else wants to join us had better get a move on, he shouted. You don't know that's my name, said Red Shoe. Vimes stared into the big protruding eyes. The only difference between Reg now and the Reg he'd left back in the future was that Constable Shoe was rather greyer and was held together in places by stitches. Zombiehood would come naturally to Reg. He was born to be dead. He believed so strongly in things that some kind of inner spring kept him going. He'd make a good copper. He didn't make a very good revolutionary. People as meticulously fervent as Reg got real revolutionaries worried. It was the way he stared. You're Red Shoe, he said. You live in Whalebone Lane. Ah, you've got secret files on me, eh? Said Reg with terrifying happiness. Not really, no. Now, if you'd be so good. I bet you've got a big file on me a mile long, said Reg. Not a whole mile, Reg, no, said Vimes. Listen, Reg, I demand to see it. Vimes sighed. Mr. Shoe, we don't have a file on you. We don't have a file on anyone, understand? Half of us can't read without using a finger. Reg, we are not interested in you. Red Shoe's slightly worrying eyes remained fixed on Vimes's face for a moment, and then his brain rejected the information as contrary to whatever total fantasy was going on inside. Well, it's no good you torturing me because I won't reveal any details about my comrades in the other revolutionary cells, said Reg. Okay, I won't then. Now, perhaps that's how we work, see? None of the cadres knows about the other ones. Really? Do they know about you? Said Vimes. For a moment, Reg's face clouded. Pardon? Well, you said you don't know about them, said Vimes. So, do they know about you? He wanted to add, you're a cell of one, Reg. The real revolutionaries are silent men with poker player eyes and probably don't know or care if you exist. You've got the shirt and the haircut and the sash and you know all the songs, but you're no urban gorilla. You're an urban dreamer. You turn over rubbish bins and scrawl on walls in the name of the people who'd clip you round the ear if they found you doing it. But you believe. Oh, so you're a secret operative, he said, to get the poor man off the hook. Reg brightened. That's right, he said. The people are the sea in which the revolutionary swims. Like swordfishes? Vimes tried. Pardon? And you're a flounder, thought Vimes. Ned's a revolutionary. He knows how to fight and he can think, even if he is on the skew. But Reg, you really ought to be indoors. Well, I can see you're a dangerous individual, he said. We'd better have you where we can keep an eye on you. Hey, that's right. You can undermine the enemy from within. The relieved Reg raised a fist in salute and carried a table to the new barricade with revolutionary speed. There was some hurried conversation behind the old makeshift barricade, already being denuded of Mrs. Rutherford's furniture. This was interrupted by the clatter of hoofbeats from the far end of Treacle Mine Road, and a sudden burst of instant decisiveness on the part of the remainder of the crowd. They poured towards the new official barricade, with Lance Constable Vimes bringing up the rear, fairly well hampered by a dining room chair. Mind out for that, shouted a female voice from somewhere behind him. It's one of a set. Vimes put his hand on the young man's shoulder. Just give me your crossbow, will you? He said. The horseman came closer. Vimes was not good at horsemen. Something in him resented being addressed by anyone 8 feet above the ground. He didn't like the sensation of being looked at by nostrils. He didn't like being talked down to. By the time they'd reached the barricade, he'd clambered around to the front of it and was standing in the middle of the street. They slowed down. It was probably the way he didn't move, and held the crossbow in the nonchalant manner of someone who knows how to use it but has decided not to for the moment. You there, said a trooper. Yes, said Vimes. Are you in charge? Yes. Can I help you? Where are your men? Vimes jerked a thumb towards the growing barricade. On the top of the heap, Mrs. Rutherford's father was snoring peacefully. But that's a barricade, said the trooper. Well done. There's a man waving a flag. Vimes turned. Surprisingly, it was Reg. Some of the men had brought out the old flag from Tilden's office and stuck it on the barricade, and Reg was the sort to wave any flag going. Probably high spirits, sir, said Vimes. Don't worry, We're all fine. It's a damn barricade, man. A rebel barricade, said the second trooper. Oh boy, thought Vimes. They have shiny, shiny breastplates and wonderfully fresh pink faces. Not exactly. In fact, it's, are you stupid, fellow? Don't you know that all barricades are to be torn down by order of the patrician? The third horseman, who had been staring at Vimes, urged his horse a little closer. What's that pip on your shoulder, officer? He said. Means I'm sergeant at arms. Special rank. And who are you? He doesn't have to tell you that, said the first trooper. Really? Said Vimes. The man was getting on his nerves. Well, you're just a trooper and I'm a bleeding sergeant, and if you dare speak to me like that again, I'll have you down off that horse and thump you across the ear. Understand? Even the horse took a step backwards. The trooper opened his mouth to speak, but the third horseman raised a white-gloved hand. Oh dear, thought Vimes, focusing on the sleeve of the red jacket. The man was a captain. Not only that, he was an intelligent one, by the look of him. He hadn't mouthed off until he'd had a chance to assess the situation. You got them sometimes. They could be dangerously bright. I note, Sergeant at Arms, said the captain, enunciating the rank with care and without apparent sarcasm, that the flag over the barricade is the flag of Ankh-Morpork. It's the one out of our watch house, said Vimes, and added, Sir. You know that the patrician has declared that the building of barricades is an act of rebellion? Yes, sir. And, said the captain patiently, well, he would say that, sir, wouldn't he? The faintest hint of a smile skimmed across the captain's face. We can't allow lawlessness, Sergeant at Arms. If we all disobeyed the law, where would we be? There's more coppers per person behind that barricade than anywhere else in the city, sir, said Vimes. You could say it's the most law-abiding place around. Now there was the sound of raised voices from behind the barricade. We own all your helmets, we own all your shoes, we all own your generals, touch us and we'll lose. More Porkia! More Porkia! More Porkia! Rebel songs, sir, said trooper number 1. The captain sighed. If you listen, Hepplewhite, you might note that it is the national anthem, sung very badly, he said. We can't allow rebels to sing that, sir. Vimes saw the captain's expression. It had a lot to say about idiots. Raising the flag and singing the anthem, Hepplewhite, are, while somewhat suspicious, not in themselves acts of treason, said the captain, and we are urgently required elsewhere. He saluted Vimes, who found himself returning the salute. We shall leave you, Sergeant at Arms. I trust your day will be full of interest. In fact, I know it. But it's a barricade, sir, the trooper insisted, glaring at Vimes. It's just a pile of furniture, man. People have been spring cleaning, I expect. You'll never be an officer if you can't see straight. Follow me, if you please. With a last nod to Vimes, the captain led his men away at a trot. Vimes leaned against the barricade, put the crossbow on the ground and fished out the cigar case. He fumbled in his pocket, pulled out the battered carton of little cigars, and, with some delicacy, slotted them into place. To the left was Cable Street. In front, Treacle Mine Road stretched all the way to Easy Street. Now, if a man could get barricades all the way up to Easy Street, there'd be quite a slice of the lower rimside behind it, which would be a lot easier to protect. We'll do it. After all, We did it. Of course, that'd mean having the Unmentionables headquarters in here with us. That's like pitching your tent over a nest of vipers. We'll handle that. We handled it. A couple of elderly people pushing a cart full of miscellaneous belongings approached the barricade. They gave Vimes a look of mute pleading. He nodded towards it and they scuttled through. All we need now is, Sarge. Fred Colon was leaning over the top of the heap. He looked more out of breath than usual. Yes, Fred? There's lots of people coming across the Ponds Bridge. There's things happening everywhere, they say. Shall we let them in? Any soldiers? Oh, I don't reckon so, Sarge. It's mostly old people and kids. And my granny. Trustworthy? Not when she's had a few pints. Let him in then. Said Colon. Yes, Fred. Some of them is watchmen. A few of the lads from Dimwell and a lot from Kingsway. I know most of them, and those I don't, I know to the ones I do, if you catch my meaning. How many? About 20. One of them's Di Dickens, sergeant at Dimwell. He says they were told they'd got to shoot people and most of them deserted on the spot. Quit, Fred, said Vimes. We don't desert. We're civilians. Now, I want young Vimes and you and Waddy and maybe half a dozen others out here fully kitted up in 2 minutes, understand? And tell Wiglet to organise squads ready to move the barricades forward at my signal. Move them, Sarge? I thought barricades stood still. And tell Snouty he's got 2 minutes to find me a bottle of brandy, said Vimes, ignoring this. A big one. Are we taking the law into our own hands again, Sarge? Said Colon. Vimes stared at the entrance to Cable Street and was aware of the weight of the cigar case in his pocket. Yes, Fred, he said. Only this time, we're going to squeeze. The two guards on the Unmentionables headquarters watched with interest as the small contingent of watchmen marched up the street and came to a halt in front of them. Ooh, look, it's the army, said one of them. What do you want? Nothing, sir, said Corporal Colon. Then you can push off. Can't do that, sir. I'm under orders. The guards stepped forward. Fred Colon was sweating, and they liked to see things like that. It was a dull job, and most of the Unmentionables were out on more interesting assignments. They entirely failed to hear the soft tread behind them. Orders to do what, mister? Said one of them, looming over Colon. There was a sigh and a soft thud behind him. Be a decoy? Quavered Colon. The remaining guard turned and met a Mrs. Goodbody No. 5 negotiator coming the other way. As the man slipped to the ground, Vimes winced and massaged his knuckles. Important lesson, lads, he said. It hurts, no matter what you do. You two drag these into the shadows to sleep it off. Vimes and Nancy Ball, you come with me. The key to winning, as always, was to look as if you have every right, nay, duty, to be where you were. It helped if you could also suggest in every line of your body that no one else had any rights to be doing anything, anywhere, whatsoever. Came easily to an old copper. Vimes led the way into the building. There were a couple of guards inside, heavily armed, behind a stone barrier that made them ideally placed to ambush any unwise intruders. They put their hands on the hilts of their swords when they saw Vimes. What's happening out there? Said one. Oh, people are getting restless, said Vimes. Getting very bad across the river, they say. That's why we've come for the prisoners in the cells. Yeah? On whose authority? Vimes swung his crossbow up. Mr. Burley and Mr. Strong in the arm, he said, and grinned. The two guards exchanged glances. Who the hell are they? Said one. There was a moment of silence, followed by Vimes saying, out of the corner of his mouth, Lance Constable Vimes. Yes, sir. What make are these crossbows? Hines Brothers, sir. They're Mark III's. Not Burley and Strong in the arm. Never heard of them, sir. Damn. 5 years too early, thought Vimes. And it was such a good line, too. Let me put it another way, he said to the guards. Give me any trouble and I will shoot you in the head. That wasn't a good line, but it did have a certain urgency, and the bonus that it was simple enough even for an unmentionable to understand. You've only got one arrow, said the guard. There was a click from beside Vimes. Sam had raised his bow too. There's two now, and since my lad here is in training, he might hit you anywhere, said Vimes. Drop your swords on the floor. Get out of the door. Run away. Do it now. Don't come back. There was a moment of hesitation, just a moment, and then the men ran for it. Better watch our backs, said Vimes. Come on. All the watch houses were pretty much the same. Stone steps led down to the cellars. Vimes hurried down them, swung open a heavy door, and stopped. Cells never smelled that good at the best of times. At the best of times, even at Treacle Mine Road, hygiene consisted of a bucket per cell and as much slopping out as Snouty felt inclined to do. But at the worst of times, the cells below Treacle Mine Road never smelled of blood. The beast stirred. In this room, there was a big wooden chair. In this room, there was, by the chair, a rack. The chair was bolted to the floor. It had wide leather straps. The rack held clubs and hammers. In this room, that was all the furnishings. The floor was dark and sticky. Down the length of it, a gully ran to a drain. Boards had been nailed over the tiny window at street level. This wasn't a place where light was welcomed. And all the walls and even the ceiling were padded heavily with sacks stuffed with straw. Sacks had even been nailed to the door. This was a very thorough cell. Not even sound was meant to escape. A couple of torches did nothing at all for the darkness except make it dirty. Behind him, Vimes heard Nancy Ball throw up. In a strange kind of dream, he walked across the floor and bent down to pick up something that gleamed in the torchlight. It was a tooth. He stood up again. A closed wooden door led off one side of the cellar. On the other, a wider tunnel almost certainly led to the cells. Vimes took a torch out of its holder, handed it to Sam and pointed along the tunnel. There were footsteps, accompanied by a jingle of keys heading towards the door and a light growing brighter underneath it. The beast tensed. Vimes dragged the largest club out of the rack and stepped swiftly to the wall beside the door. Someone was coming, someone who knew about this room, someone who called themselves a copper. Getting a firm, two-handed grip, Vimes raised the club and looked across the stinking room and saw young Sam watching him. Young Sam with his bright, shiny badge and face full of strangeness. Vimes lowered the club, leaned it delicately against the wall, and pulled the leather cosh from his pocket. Shackled, not quite understanding, the beast was dragged back into the night. A man stepped through the door, whistling under his breath, took a few steps into the room, saw young Sam, opened his mouth, and then fell fast asleep. He was a big man and hit the cobbles heavily. He had a leather hood over his face and was naked to the waist. A big ring of keys hung from his belt. Vimes darted into the corridor behind the door, ran around a corner, burst into a small, brightly lit room, and grabbed a man he found in there. This one was a lot smaller and suppressed a scream as Vimes dragged him up out of his chair. "And what does Daddy do at work all day, mister?" Vimes roared. The little man was suddenly clairvoyant. One look at Vimes's eyes told him how short his future might be. "I'm just a clerk. I just write things down," he protested. He held up a pen by way of desperate demonstration. Vimes looked at the desk. There were compasses there and other geometer's tools, symbols of Swing's insane sanity. There were books and folders stuffed with paperwork. And there was a yard-long steel ruler. He grabbed it in his spare hand and slammed it on the desktop. The heavy steel made a satisfying noise. "And," he said, his face a few inches from the struggling man, "and I measure people. It's all in the captain's book. I just measure people. I don't do anything wrong. I'm not a bad man." Again, the ruler slammed into the desk. But this time, Vimes had twisted it and the steel edge chopped into the wood. "Want me to cut you down to size, mister?" The little man's eyes rolled. "Please? Is there another way out of here?" Vimes slapped the rule down on the desk. The flicker of eyes was enough. Vimes saw a doorway in the wall, almost lost in the wooden panelling. "Good. Where does it come out?" Now, Vimes was nose to nose with the man who, in police parlance, was helping him with his inquiries. "You're all alone here," he said. "You have no friends here. You sat and took notes for a torturer, a bloody torturer. And I see a desk, and it's got a desk drawer. And if you ever want to hold a pen again, you'll tell me everything I want to know." "Warehouse," the man gasped. "Next door." "Right, sir. Thank you, sir. You've been very helpful," said Vimes, lowering the limp body to the floor. "Now, sir, I'm just handcuffing you to this desk for a moment, sir, for your protection." Who from?" "Me. I'll kill you if you try to run away, sir." Vimes hurried back to the main chamber. The torturer was still out cold. Vimes hauled him up into the chair with great effort and pulled off his hood and recognised the face. The face, yes, but not the person. That is, it was the kind of face you saw a lot of in Ankh-Morpork. Big, bruised, and belonging to someone who'd never quite learned that hitting people long after they'd lost consciousness was a wicked thing to do. He wondered if the man actually liked beating people to death. They often didn't think about it. It's just a job. Well, he wasn't about to ask him. He buckled him in with every strap, even the one that went across the forehead, pulling the last one tight just as the man came around. The mouth opened and Vimes stuffed the hood into it. Then he took the keyring and locked the main door. That should ensure a little extra privacy. He met young Sam coming the other way as he headed for the cells. The boy's face was white in the gloom. "Found anyone?" said Vimes. "Oh, Sarge." "Yes." "Oh, Sarge. Sarge." Tears were running down the Lance Constable's face. Vimes reached out and steadied himself. Sam felt as though there were no bones left in his body. He was trembling. "There's a woman in the last cell, and she... Sarge. Oh, Sarge." "Try taking deep breaths," said Vimes. "Not that this air is fit to breathe." "And there's a room right at the end, Sarge." "Oh, Sarge. Nancy Ball fainted again, Sarge." "You didn't," said Vimes, patting him gently on the back. "But there's..." "Let's rescue what we can, shall we, lad?" "But we were on the hurry-up wagon, Sarge." "What?" said Vimes. And then it dawned. "Oh, yes. But we didn't hand anyone over, lad," he said. "Remember." "But I've been on it before, Sarge. All the lads have. We just handed people over and went back to the watch house for cocoa, Sarge." "Well, you'd had orders," said Vimes, for what good that did. "We didn't know." Not exactly, thought Vimes. We didn't ask. We just shut our minds to it. People went in through that front door, and some of the poor devils came out through the secret door, not always in one box. They hadn't measured up. Nor did we. He heard a low, visceral sound from the boy. Sam had spotted the torturer in the chair. He shook himself away from Vimes, ran over to the rack and snatched up a club. Vimes was ready. He grabbed the boy, swung him round and twisted the thing out of his hand before murder was done. "No, that's not the way. This is not the time. Hold it back. Tame it. Don't waste it. Send it back. It'll come when you call." "You know he did those things," shouted Sam, kicking at his legs. "You said we had to take the law into our own hands." Ah, thought Vimes. This is just the time for a long debate about the theory and practice of justice. Here comes the shortened version. You don't bash out a man's brains when he's tied to a chair. He did, and you don't. That's because you're not him. "But they..." "Stand to attention, Lance Constable," shouted Vimes, and the straw-covered ceiling drank and deadened the sound. Sam blinked through reddened eyes. "Okay, Sarge, but are you going to snivel all day? Forget about this one. Let's get the living out, right?" "Hard to tell with..." Sam began, wiping his nose. "Do it. Follow me." He knew what was going to be in the dark arches of the cell tunnels, but that didn't make it any better. Some people could walk, or maybe hop. One or two had just been beaten up, but not so badly that they couldn't hear what was going on just out of sight and dwell on it. They cringed when the gates were opened and whimpered as he touched them. No wonder Swing got his confessions. And some were dead. Others were, well, if they weren't dead, if they'd just gone somewhere in their heads, it was as sure as hell that there was nothing for them to come back to. The chair had broken them again and again. They were beyond the help of any man. Just in case, and without any feeling of guilt, Vimes removed his knife and gave what help he could. There was not a twitch, not a sigh. He stood up, black and red storm clouds in his head. You could almost understand a thug, simple as a fist, being paid decent money for doing something he didn't mind doing. But Swing had brains. Who really knew what evil lurked in the heart of men? Me. Who knew what sane men were capable of? Still me, I'm afraid. Vimes glanced at the door of the last room. No, he wasn't going in there again. No wonder it stank here. You can't hear me, can you? Oh, I thought you might, said Death, and waited. Vimes went to help young Sam bring Nancy Ball round. Then they half carried, half walked the prisoners out along the passageway up into the warehouse. They laid them down and went back and dragged out the clerk, whose name was Trebilcock. Vimes explained to him the advantages of turning King's evidence. They were not major advantages, except when they were compared with the huge disadvantages that would follow swiftly if he refused to do so. And Vimes stepped out into the early evening. Colon and the squad were still waiting. The whole business had taken only 20 minutes or so. The corporal saluted, and then his nose wrinkled. Yes, we stink, said Vimes. He unbuckled his belt and pulled off his breastplate and chainmail undershirt. Filth of the place had crawled everywhere. Okay, he said, when he no longer felt that he was standing in a sewer. I want a couple of men at the entrance over there in the warehouse, a couple around the back with truncheons, and the rest ready out here. Just like we talked about, okay? Wallop them first, arrest them later. Right, sir. Colon nodded. Men set off. Now give me that brandy, Vimes added. He unwrapped his neckerchief, soaked it in spirit, and tied it around the neck of the bottle. He heard the angry murmur from the squad. They'd just seen Sam and Nancy Ball bringing out some of the prisoners. There was worse, said Vimes. Believe me. Top middle window, Fred. Right, Sarge, said Fred Colon, dragging his eyes away from the walking wounded. He raised his crossbow and neatly took out 2 window panes and a glazing bar. Vimes located his silver cigar case, removed a cigar, lit it, applied the match to the brandy-soaked rag, waited for it to catch, and hurled the bottle through the window. There was a tinkle, a woof of exploding spirit, and a flame that rapidly grew. "Nice one, Sarge," said Fred. "I don't know if this is the right time, Sarge, but we brought an extra bottle while we were about it." "Really, Fred? And what do you say?" Fred Colon glanced at the prisoners again. "I say we use it," he said. It went through one of the ground floor windows. Smoke was already curling out from under the eaves. "We haven't seen anyone go in or out apart from those guards," said Fred as they watched it. "I don't reckon there's many left in there." "Just so long as we destroy the nest," said Vimes. The front door opened slightly, increasing the draft to the fires. Someone was checking. "They'll wait until the last minute and come out fighting, Fred," Vimes warned. "Good, Sarge." "It's getting darker," said Colon grimly. He pulled out his truncheon. Vimes walked around to the back of the building, nodded at the watchman waiting there, and locked the door with his stolen keyring. It was a narrow door anyway. Anyone inside would surely go for the big doors at the front where they could spread out easily and an ambush wasn't so easy. He checked on the warehouse. But that was an unlikely exit for the same reason. Besides, he'd locked the door to the cellar, hadn't he? Young Sam grinned at him. "Then that's why you left the torturer tied up, eh, Sarge?" he said. Damn. That hadn't occurred to him. He'd been so angry with the clerk, he'd forgotten all about the brute in the chair. Vimes hesitated. But burning was a horrible death. He reached for his knife and remembered it was back in its sheath on his sword belt. Smoke was already drifting up the passage into the warehouse. "Give me your knife, Sam," he said. "I'll just go and check on him." The Lance Constable handed over the knife with some reluctance. "What are you going to do, Sarge?" "You just get on with your job, Lance Constable, and I'll do mine." Vimes slipped down into the passage. "I'll cut one strap," he thought. "They're fiddly to undo. And then, well, he'll have a chance, even in the smoke. That's more than anyone else got." He crept through the office and into the chamber. One torch was still alight, but the flame was just a nimbus in the yellow haze. The man was trying to rock the heavy chair, but it had been secured firmly to the floor. Some thought had gone into that chair. The straps on the buckles were hard to reach. Even if a prisoner got one hand free, and that hand had not yet felt the professionalism of the torturer, they'd have a job to get out of the chair in a hurry. He reached down to cut a strap and heard a key in the lock. Vimes stepped swiftly into the darker shadows. The door opened, letting in the noise of distant shouting and the crackle of burning timber. It sounded as though the unmentionables were making a run for the clear air of the street. Finding Swing stepped delicately into the room and locked the door behind him. He stopped when he saw the seated figure and examined it carefully. He walked to the office doorway and looked inside. He peered into the cells, but by then Vimes had moved soundlessly around a wall. He heard Find Thee sigh. There was the familiar sound of moving steel, followed by a small, organic sort of noise, and a cough. Vimes reached down for his sword. But it was up on the road too, wasn't it? Down here, the song in his head came back louder, with the background clink of metal that was always part of it. See how they rise up, rise up, rise up. He shook his head as if that had dislodged the memory. He had to concentrate. Vimes ran into the room and made a leap. It seemed to him that he stayed in the air a long time. There was the torturer, blood on his shirt. There was Swing, just sliding the blade back into the stick. And Vimes, airborne, armed with just a knife. I'm going to get out of this, he thought. I know, because I remember this. I remember Keel coming out and saying it was all over. But that was the real Keel. This is me. It doesn't have to happen the same way. Swing jerked aside with surprising speed, trying to tug his blade out again. Vimes hit the sacks on the wall and had the sense to roll away immediately. The blade slashed down beside him, spilling straw onto the floor. He'd expected Swing to be a bad swordsman. That ridiculous stick suggested it. But he was a street swordsman. No finesse, no fancy tricks, just some talent at moving the blade quickly and sticking it where you hoped it wasn't going to go. Fire crackled in the corner of the ceiling. Dripping spirit or sheer heat had worked itself through the heavy floorboards. A couple of the sacks began to blossom thick white smoke, which rolled above the men in a spreading cloud. He circled the chair, watching Swing intently. I believe you are making a grave mistake, said Swing. Vimes concentrated on avoiding the sword. Hard times demand hard measures. Every leader knows that, said Swing. Vimes dodged, but continued circling, knife at the ready. History needs its butchers as well as its shepherds, Sergeant. Swing jabbed, but Vimes had been watching his eyes and swayed away in time. The man wasn't pleading. He didn't understand what had been done to require it. But he could see Vimes's face. There was no emotion in it at all. You must understand that in times of national emergency, we cannot be too concerned with the so-called rights of... Vimes darted sideways and along the haze-filled corridor to the office. Swing lurched after him. The blade sliced Vimes on the back of the leg. He sprawled onto the clerk's desk, knife skittering from his fingers. Swing circled to find a stabbing point. He drew back the sword. Vimes's hand came up, holding the steel ruler. The smack of its flat steel knocked the sword right out of the captain's grasp. Vimes pulled himself upright as though in a dream, following on the curve of the stroke. Send it back into the dark until you need it. He turned the ruler as the backstroke began, and it whispered through the air, edge first. leaving the hazy smoke rolling and coiling behind it. The tip caught Swing across the neck. Behind Vimes, the white smoke tumbled out of the corridor. The ceiling of the bloodied chamber was falling in. But he stayed, watching Swing with the same blank, intent expression. The man had raised his hands to his throat, blood spurting from between his fingers. He rocked, gasping for a breath that couldn't come, and fell backwards. Vimes tossed the ruler on top of him and limped away. Outside, there was the thunder of moving barricades. Swing opened his eyes. The world around him was grey, except for the black-clad figure in front of him. He sought, as he always did, to learn more about the new person by carefully examining their features. Your eyes are... your nose is... your chin... He gave up. Yes, said Death. I'm a bit of a tricky one. This way, Mr. Swing.
He's dead! Yes!
Oh!
I'm glad that guy's fucking dead.
How y'all doing? Everyone okay? That was intense. That was an intense one. Hydrate. Hydrate.
It was a complicated
whole
chapter to have a giggling baby at. There's an odd juxtaposition.
Ash. Read the room, mates.
I know, right?
One would say it was a
Really
tricky
bad at
one.
I was having some like good lightness brought in between Ash and Aroha. It's a nice balance.
Yeah. I just came out of bed and wanted to flirt with Lyric the whole time, and it was.
Oof, I'm a bit sweaty after that.
That was intense.
It's got me all a bit intense. Oh, is that water for me, my loves? Oh, thank you. Water for you, love.
Water for you.
Oh, it's water for
Some
you.
real good water, that
Oh,
is.
it's nice water. Oh, that's good quality water, that is.
Yes.
Okay. I'm afraid I need to boost because I promised to call my friend's kid before he went to bed.
Oh, that's so lovely.
Yeah, but I'm sure Becca and Malcolm will be around a bit.
That would be lovely.
Okay.
Let's say goodbye to the catch-up crew. Yes, say goodbye to the catch-up crew. Catch-up crew. Drink some water. Be hydrated. If you need aftercare, we are here. We love you. Goodbye, catch-up crew. Goodbye. Goodbye. Story time.